Do you have a few minutes?
I gotta make some changes in my life.
Do you even realize what your life means?
Morning Cup of Joe, a Missouri S&T podcast using pop culture to destigmatize mental health.
Fake laugh, hiding real pain.
Do not self-destruct.
I didn't ask for this to happen.
Join us in using everyday examples to explain usable techniques to help improve your mental well-being.
Stay a while and listen.
Welcome back, minors. My name is Amber Johnston. I'm a counselor here at Student Wellbeing.
And I'm Tracy Kriegel, and I'm also a counselor here at Student Wellbeing. And it's time for your Morning Cup of Joe.
So, Tracy, this week I wanted to talk about a story that both of us know pretty well. The story, it's a book and a TV show and I don't know what all else, but it's called Lessons in Chemistry. Are you familiar with it?
I absolutely loved those TV shows. I watched the series like from the beginning to end, so I binge watched it. So, but I just, I enjoyed it because there was such a good storyline. So, in the day and age that it was set, I found it very interesting, so yeah, it was a good show.
Yeah. I read the book, so we're coming from a little bit different perspectives because I read the book while you watched the TV show. So there's a little bit of differences between the two, but you should be able to follow no matter which media you chose to consume. So like usual in this podcast, we're going to cover the themes, and watching or reading the story is absolutely not needed. We also will not be spoiling the ending of the book or the TV show. And instead, we're simply going to talk about the overall themes and character development, and nothing we talk about will be a surprise from pretty much the first page of the book.
Right, so this time we're going to be talking about the main character. Her name is Elizabeth Zott, and what she can teach us about grit and resilience, which is a lot.
Absolutely. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, Elizabeth Zott is a chemist, and the book is set in the early 50s to the 1960s, and it covers a pretty decent span of time. Basically, the book's set during a time when there are not a lot of women in STEM fields, and even though she's super smart and very good at her job, she continually faces discrimination, sexism, misogyny from those around her of actually both sexes.
Right, and at the very beginning of the story, she's placed on a project without funding to buy some of the basic supplies that she needed. So she basically has to go in from one of her male counterparts and take things from the lab because he's got so much better funding, which in those day and age, and even today's day and age, was totally unethical. But she wanted to make her work complete. So she knew to get what she needed to have that happen, she had to make it happen.
Right. She was told basically to do this, but wasn't given the tools to do it. And then she's kind of like, how do I make this happen? And so the only way to make it happen was to go and steal her supplies. The scene is really funny because she flat just goes into his lab and steals his beakers from him. And here he is, this Nobel laureate, this super famous chemist that everybody is just frankly afraid of because they're all intimidated by him. And she's just there totally just stealing his beakers.
Right. She just went in and took them. So, and it's really interesting because the storyline, she was very cautious, very guarded around men. But I love the storyline because she ultimately falls for this guy.
Yeah.
And so it was very hard because she had very hardcore boundaries. But, it's a typical storyline, but she falls for him. And he's this famous chemist. And so I love how the story gets set on the TV show. I'm not exactly sure how it went in the book, Amber. You'd have to talk to that. But it really it's neat how it sets it up because there's a lot of trauma that was involved in the storyline, which if you watch the TV show or you read the book, it'll talk to that. But it's really neat how she was able to overcome some of those things. And she does. She falls for this man who's a Nobel Prize winner. And she falls for him.
Well, and he's super supportive too. Like he's believes in her dreams. He wants to support her. He uses his influence to get people to take her more seriously, even though she tells him not to. And he basically becomes like her biggest cheerleader. And there's trauma on both sides for both of them.
Absolutely.
And he's just there like being this supportive, loving partner, and they start dating and they fall in love, and it's just beautiful.
Right.
Now, you know from the very beginning of this story, from the first page, that they aren't together anymore because she's a single mom. But the story is told out of order. Like this all happens kind of in the middle to then the beginning and then back to the middle, and then like we're flipping around in the time frame. So you don't really know how she ended up being a single mom. You just know that she ended up being a single mom.
Right. And it gets kind of confusing. So you kind of have to stay on track with it. But you know that she has a cooking show.
Yes.
And she's really famous, and that everybody loves her.
Including Nixon.
Right.
The very beginning of the book starts with like a quote about Nixon talking about her cooking show.
Right. I loved how, like, if you remember, like, the first episode, like, she steps out of her car and there's, like, all these, well, on the TV show anyways, I don't know about the book, but on the TV show, like, she steps out of her car and, like, you know, it's like a typical 60s, 70s, like, flash bulbs are flashing everywhere, and she steps out of her car and it's like, ooh, world famous person, and like people are like wanting her autograph, and like, and then she goes into the cooking show, and you're like, who is this famous person? And she's like setting the stage and she's cooking, and you're like, okay. And you know, she's got the perfect hair and like her little skirt and her little shirt, and it's like, okay, this is cool. Where are we going? And then like the show takes off, but it's just a really good show. So,
well, in the book, it starts with her tucking her daughter in for bed and leaving to go to the cooking show. That's how it starts in the book. So here you are. You're like, wait, this is not what I thought this book was about. Like, what's going on here? Here's this woman tucking her daughter into bed at 8:00 at night and leaving, like leaving the house, and she's like, you're like, what's going on here? And then it flashes back. So it's really, really unusual.
Yep.
So how do you go from being a chemist to being a chef? Well, that is the story of the book. Basically, without spoiling too much of the story, the chemist falls in love with. His name's Cal. He dies. And after he dies, she finds that she's pregnant. And because this is the 1950s, she's fired for being pregnant and left alone. And she has no family for various reasons and no friends. And she's left pregnant, unmarried, and absolutely no way to support herself.
Which was tough during those times. So yeah, 50s, I'm thinking it was later in the timeline. But so this is where she really had to start thinking outside the box.
Yes.
And, you know, here's those chemistry skills where she had to be a critical thinker. And so for the first time, she had to do, and what was really neat, she started doing freelance chemistry.
Yeah, in her kitchen. She totally sets up her kitchen as a mini lab. Like, takes a sledgehammer, it's like she's pregnant, tearing down her kitchen and creating this mini lab in the middle of her kitchen.
Right. And I don't know if the book expressed this, but in the movie, it was really neat, not to try to be a spoiler, but she had to use her creative skills. This is kind of the terrible thing she did, but it was really interesting what she did. So because she had worked at the lab and got fired, she started ordering things she put it on the tab of the workplace. Like she figured out ways to like order all the chemistry items she needed for her kitchen, but put it on the tab of the place of employment.
See, they didn't really talk about that in the book.
So it was really interesting. So she like acted as though she was still employed there. And so all of the items, like the chemistry services, like the countertops, all the beakers, like the, the warmers,
Bunsen burners.
Bunsen burners,
Yeah.
all those got billed to the lab. So it was it was like her revenge. So like, but she had to think, it was so funny. Like, so she had to like use all those creative skills to find a way to fund her chemistry lab.
Right.
You know, so she did it. And so that was her way of creating her lab. And so she was still, you know, finding ways to think outside the box. Not the right way to do it, by no means, but she did it. And so, you know, that was how she managed. So then flashing forward, she has her daughter. She's in grade school. And this is where, you know, it's interesting because one of her classmates, the daughter's classmates, started eating her daughter's lunch. And of course, you know, also, even though, remember, she's a chemist, she was also a wonderful cook. And so she realizes her daughter was giving away her lunch. And so here she is, Elizabeth. She's like, she's going to go complain to the daughter's father. And she goes and she complains to the daughter's father, who works at this studio where she was actually eventually ends up hosting this show. And so he, of course, has to taste the food because she eventually ends up going back and gives him some food. And he offers her a job.
Yeah.
And so this is where then she figures out how to approach cooking as a chemist. And on this cooking show, what becomes so interesting is she starts explaining chemical reactions when she's cooking.
Right.
So I hope you out there, as you're listening to this podcast, you're starting to relate to the chemistry and food, and so some of the lessons in chemistry. So,
but they didn't want her to.
Right.
They wanted her to go in and be this Donna Reed 50s housewife. And like, I love the scene in the book where she first walks in and they've got all the counters are cluttered because she likes a clean workspace. Like, she's a scientist through and through, so she wants everything neat and orderly, and she doesn't like all the clutter. So she goes in like the first episode, and she's literally picking up all of this stuff that they've painstakingly put to decorate the set and throwing it to the audience and giving it away.
Yes.
Like, I don't need all this clutter. And so they're live. They're on live TV. And so they don't know what to do with her because they're like,
what is she doing?
what is she doing? She's giving away all of her set design. And then she's like, okay, now that we've got a clean workspace, let's begin.
Right. Well, she stood up for her rights too, and all of her life, and she stood up for women.
Yes.
And this was kind of the atypical because and this is where sexism came in. This is where she went off grid. She wasn't being put in her place where women typically had to be. And this is where she also, in the realm of chemistry too, she'd always been put down, and she had to stand up for what she believed in. And she put herself in the place of being that role of being a chemist.
Right.
And so this is where she shined.
Right.
And so she didn't take on that role of just doing the modern day woman of cooking, but she shined in her ability to be a chemist, but also to be a good cook. And people of that day wanted her knowledge. And through the cooking show, she showed the skills of what cooking was, but how cooking could be better, but how chemistry related to that. It was so fascinating to watch her just shine.
Well, and the other thing that she spoke to, I think the reason why she spoke so much to the women watching the show is because she talked about how you are smart enough to understand this. You can do this. You can do anything you want. And that was so much like revolutionary for that time, because a lot of women were like taught, no, you belong in the kitchen. You're not smart enough to understand this. You're not like, and so all these women that were in Elizabeth's orbit were kind of awed by her because she had the grit and resilience to deal with all of these things that were happening to her, and nobody thought she was going to be successful. They wanted her to be sexier, they wanted her to be less like about science and more about just, you know, being that perfect ideal of what they thought she wanted to be, what they thought a woman should be,
Right.
which would be a homemaker and a mother, and that's it.
The woman in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, what's interesting is she never gave up. She faced all the loss. She lost her job, the love of her life, in a matter of a few months.
Yeah.
But she never gave up. Instead, she built that chemistry lab in her kitchen, and she pushed forward.
Yeah.
Through all of the loss, all the grief, all the trauma. She never gave up. She just kept going.
So what's really funny, that we failed to mention about the chemistry lab in our kitchen, you guys may be wondering, how do you do freelance chemistry? Freelance chemistry comes when you leave an assignment open that nobody else understands because you're so ahead in your field that nobody else understands how to do the work that you were doing. And so you're literally having the people who took over your project come to you to tell you, for you to interpret their data and help them with it, and they're paying you. That's how it happens. She was literally doing the same science in her kitchen, and the people who were being paid twice as much as she was, because she didn't have her PhD either, because she had been assaulted and kicked out of her university, blamed for the assault, and then kicked out of her university. So she didn't even get paid for it, or didn't get her PhD. And so here she is doing this work in her kitchen for them. It's like that. I don't know. That was just like chef's kiss.
Right. And wasn't she right at the edge of her PhD?
Yes, she was
Right.
at the very, very end.
Yeah.
But she was sexually assaulted by another student, and then they blamed
Professor.
her for it. It was, it was a professor.
Professor, sure.
And then she got blamed for it, and because she got blamed for it, they kicked her out.
Yeah, they wouldn't let her finish her thesis, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, she was at the thesis level. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So this is what we call grit. It's overcoming hurdles and the failures of life and pressing forward and keep trying again and getting back up and trying again.
Right. So, it would be easy for her to have just done things in their way and just give up and give in, but she never did. She just kept showing up every day, calm, cool, collected, and doing what was right no matter what happened. And, and I say doing what's right, but there was times where she went off grid, but she did what was right for her situation.
Yeah.
And that was using those critical thinking skills, doing what had to happen, and that's difficult because it's what, was necessitating what had to help her move forward. And that was sometimes kind of pushing the limits
Yeah.
a little bit of times and really using those critical thinking skills and moving forward. And that was tough. That was real tough.
Well, and people admired her for it. They liked the show because she was different. If she'd done what they'd wanted her to do, if she'd fit into the box that they had wanted her to fit in, she wouldn't have been as popular.
No.
People would have turned it off. They wouldn't have listened. They wouldn't have watched. Even when other people stole her research, she just kept showing up, and it paid off.
Right. Exactly. Resilience is the ability to overcome obstacles and handle misfortune. Resilience can come from grit, and it's like the movie trope where the bad guy keeps punching the good guy and he keeps getting up. This resilience, like perseverance over obstacles, is getting back up even after you've been knocked down.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down. I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna
I
keep
absolutely
me down.
love that song.
Yeah.
I was singing along with you over here, Amber.
Yeah, it's Chumbawamba Tub Thumping.
It's hilarious.
That came out
Yep.
many, many, many moons ago. But yeah, I love a song. It's great.
Why not? Resilience is basically being persistent and getting back up after you've been knocked down repeatedly over and over and over. Wile E. Coyote never gave up, even though the Roadrunner, kept knocking him down and
Yeah.
the anvil kept falling on his head. He never gave up.
He just kept going.
He just kept on going.
You know what I think of? When we talk about grit and resilience, I always think of the ending scene in Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid.
Yep.
And the crane kick scene where Johnny kept beating Daniel down, messed up his leg. I don't know if he broke it. He just did that kick down on his knee, and so he can't put weight on his knee. He's bleeding. He can barely stand, and he still gets up and ends up winning the match. that the match, the whole background, like it becomes the background of the Cobra Kai series, is like Daniel's resilience in that, and then how Johnny kind of goes down like this like spiral downward in his life because of this traumatic thing that happened.
Right, it's this amazing scene. If you think about it, that idea that somebody faces adversity and still gets up and perseveres is kind of the basic idea of a lot of heroines or heroes in pop culture.
Yeah, heroines too.
Right. True.
Both.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So, if grit is resilience plus passion over time, so resilience is getting back up, but when you keep going and working towards those long-term goals, then that's basically grit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Grit is when we take that resilience, that getting back up, and then we add a passion and a long-term goal for that. So I'm not only getting back up, I'm redirecting myself towards the goals that I have, and making sure that I reach the goals. And so if you go back to like what we talked about with the show, the resilience was her keeping her integrity and moving forward when she lost the love of her life, when she lost her job. Her grit was what kept her striving to get back into chemistry. Like her doing the show, all that if she would have just adapted, that would have been resilience. The grit was the fact that she kept the chemistry, kept working towards her goals of being a chemist, even when it wasn't convenient, when it wasn't easy. And she finished doing the research she was doing. She could have kept getting back up without working towards her long-term goals, but she didn't. And just because we keep getting up and adapting doesn't mean we're moving towards those goals that we want. It just means that we haven't been knocked out yet. We're just getting up and keeping going, which there's a lot to be said for that. But that grit, that's what keeps us on that path.
Right, and it's likened to a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
The fish can give up, but if you're out of water and you can't breathe, this terrible thing has happened. Resilience is that fish flopping on the shore, not giving up and still trying, fighting and trying to move forward. Grit is the fish flopping it back towards the water. See how the fish must be resilient, but also have grit. Resilient is the gas pedal, and grit is the steering wheel.
Mm-hmm.
That's so. I think. What is it? My head is just thinking, I imagine that fish. I say that out loud, and I always think about visioning the fish on the seashore.
Uh-huh.
When I say it out loud, I always think about it, but I always vision it too.
Uh-huh.
So I hope when people are hearing this, they can hear it, but they can also see it.
Yeah.
'Cause
Visualize that little fish flopping there.
Yeah.
Or you got to ask yourself, am I going to be the fish that just gives up? Am I going to be the fish that keeps flopping?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be the fish that flops towards back towards the water?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, you've heard and you see the whale that gets stuck on, the seashore, then people help them back out.
Yeah.
Are we the person who just lays up on the seashore and says, yep, I'm done?
Yep.
Or do we go, hey, I need help too?
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean, even though, like, let's say, where are that fish? Like, it doesn't mean we can't pivot.
Right.
And by pivoting, that means, and this is a vital part of grit and resilience, pivoting means sometimes changing our goals based on the circumstances that we're in. So maybe our goals do change. Maybe something's happened in our life and has made a goal that we've had unreachable, or maybe we don't want it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We can simply just change our mind. We're allowed to do that.
Right.
And we can do what's called pivoting. And pivoting means that I'm not just trying to survive the moment. I'm still working towards a long-term plan, even if that was different than it was prior to this whole situation hitting.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, you were talking about pivoting. Actually, Elizabeth does a lot of pivoting. Doing chemistry in her kitchen and starting a cooking show. Those are all pivots.
Mm-hmm.
But she never loses sight of her long-term goals.
No, she doesn't.
So how do we build grit and resilience in our own lives?
Well, first we must have passion in our goals. We got to want it. We've got to want to be where we're shooting for. And it must give us a sense of purpose. And we also want to give ourselves kindness when we struggle and reframe our failures and our obstacles in terms of what we need to recover from them instead of dwelling on what we lost. Because that's easy. It's easy to focus on, something bad happens. If I was a fish, I could be like, oh yeah, I'm stuck on the land and I'm never going to get back and this is terrible. I can't breathe and this is it. I can focus on that, or I can focus on, whatever the issue is, instead of focusing on what my long-term goal is. And it's easy, like I said, it's easy to lose sight of it.
Right. And so I think we have to give ourselves space to grieve, but it's important to realize that we can recover from this. We can move forward. It's not the end of our story. You said, the fish that's on the shore, what's the plan to get back out to sea? So instead of focusing on, I'm going to lay here and die, I can also focus on, how do I get back to the sea? And if our focus is one or the other, the focus is death, the focus is life, where is our focus?
Well, a good example of this would be let's say you fail a class.
I was just thinking that, Amber. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. If I fail a class, you got to ask yourself, where does this fit into my long-term goals? Okay. So I failed the class. What do I need to recover? Do I need to retake the class?
Absolutely.
Do I need to, is this a class? Sometimes it's not a class I need to retake. Sometimes it's I don't even need this for my degree. Well, how do I adapt it so that the hit on my GPA isn't going to affect me as much as I feel like it will be? Is this going to prevent me from getting the degree that I want? If it is, how do I pivot into another field that still gets me to the long-term goals, or change my long-term goals into a direction that I want to go in? It's failing the class isn't the end. It just means that sometimes we need to pivot, and sometimes we need to relook at our plan and change our goals.
Right, exactly. And one of the things I always think about is, if we're not used to a C, we're definitely not used to a D, or we're definitely not used to an F. And nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to say, my goal is to come into this class and fail the class. That's not our goal. Our goal is to come in and pass the class. But if we're used to getting an A all the time, we're not used to nothing less than an A. Right. And so if we fail the class, we do have to pivot. And we have to put a different plan of action in place for ourselves. And so if we have to retake the class, that feels unfamiliar for us. And so adding another class changes the course, and we do have to do a pivot. And noticing and recognizing that for ourselves, we have to give ourselves permission and say, I can be okay with this. It's not that that's the end of our course. It's a small pivot. And so can we take a course over the summer? What are the other options? Can we transfer the course in? Of course, transferring a course in doesn't replace that course on campus, so it doesn't replace the GPA. But can we take it at a different time? As long as there's not a class that's pending us taking that course, can we take it at a different time? Using those critical thinking skills, that's that piece that don't let it control you and control your emotions. So I think that's that place where we have to give ourselves grace and not allow that change to control us and our being and our mental health.
Well, and we have to grieve.
We do.
We have to grieve it. Because sometimes, especially I've seen students that they've really struggled, and maybe they've had to change their major because of struggling.
Sure.
And they have to grieve the fact that maybe their major isn't going to look like what they thought it was going to look like. And now they're going down a different path.
Sure.
And we have to process, is this path going to lead to the same jobs, the same goals? And a lot of the times, yes. It's just a different wording on the diploma, but it can still lead to the same place. That's another example of a pivot. So it's realizing that just because something has happened, it doesn't mean that we have to lay down and die. We don't have to be that fish on the shore. There's other ways to get to where we want to go.
Right, exactly. And that's that willingness to look towards, those other goals. We don't have to own other people's thoughts. We don't have to own other people's emotions,
Right.
other people's actions. It's being who we are.
Yes.
And, I love what you always say, be you, do you. And today needs you, and I think that's that place that when we get so upset with tomorrow, today needs you.
Yes.
And this is that space that, when we can embrace, I'm going through change, I'm going through loss, I'm going through this life situation, recognizing that and giving yourself the permission to feel your feelings. And if you need help feeling your feelings, that's why we are here. That's why counselors are here at Student Wellbeing. That's why you can call 988. You can call 741-741. You can call the Trevor line. You can call the helplines. That's why counselors are here. There's therapists. There's people all over the world who care, who want to help you through life's most difficult times. That's where grit and resilience comes in, and that's where we want to be here. In this story about Elizabeth and Cal in Lessons of Chemistry, their lives were very difficult. And when you watch the movie or you read the book, there may be situations, and we need to put a content warning with this particular episode, because there may be things, if you actually watch the movie or you read the book, that may trigger you.
Absolutely.
And so those are those things that if you do get triggered, just know that we're here. We're here to help you process those things because life's difficult.
It is.
It's hard sometimes. So.
And there are people that care, that absolutely want to help. And that's the good thing about talking to somebody else, whether that be a trusted friend, whether that be a therapist, whether that be a helpline, like whoever. Sometimes sharing it allows other people to kind of give you the other perspective, because we get stuck in our own point of view, and we're unable to see the big picture. And have you ever heard this song by Jimmy Eat World, The Middle?
I don't know if I have or not. If you played it, I might.
Well, it's a really good song. It was early 2000s, I want to say. But it's this very upbeat poppy song, and when it was written, from my understanding of the backstory of it, was that the band was kind of playing, going through this, and they weren't making it. They were just playing over and over and over and over, and they felt like they weren't good enough. Like, why are we not getting discovered, kind of thing. And so they wrote this song, and basically the song is about not giving up, and it talks about the middle, like you're in the middle of the ride. Oh. And so it's super amazing. And if you get distracted by the upbeat lyric or the upbeat beat, there's acoustic versions that are slowed down. Nice. Super, super, super inspiring song. Like, so much that I've started singing it to my kids as a bedtime song.
That's nice.
It's a really, really good song.
Definitely have to check that out.
So if you want to learn some strategies to improve your grit and resilience, there's a fantastic group here, and the Student Wellbeing.
It's called Grit and Resilience.
Absolutely. It's a great group, and just let us know. We'll get you hooked up with the group. And
you can actually go on to the Student Wellbeing website and check that out. So,
yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us this week, Miners, and we want you to have a great week, and just let us know if you need us.
We'll see you next week.
Take care. If you like this podcast, please remember to like and subscribe. To schedule an appointment or to reach out to us about future topics you would like to see, please email us at wellbeing@mst.edu. You can also reach us by phone at 573-341-4211. We are located at 204 Norwood Hall.
I accept the challenge.
Get out there and do your best!
Hey, go easy on yourself. Come on now.
Now you're talking!
For more mental health and well-being content, please follow us on Facebook at Missouri S&T Wellbeing and on Instagram at S&T Wellbeing.
But most importantly,
never give up.